So, hello and welcome to another of the series of Chatting With. And today we're talking to Ed Bellamy, who writes a column in Flyer and who specialises, he won't like me saying this, but specialises in turning complex stuff into simpler stuff. And today it's all about licensing and licensing extensions. So, Ed, how you doing? What are you drinking? Hope that's vodka.
No, just taking a sip of water there, Ian. Yeah, good, thanks, Ian. Thank you for having me. Yes, so as has been reported in the GA press and on the forums and all the rest of it, there are now a couple of exemptions that essentially allow pilots to extend the validity of their ratings on a one-time basis until until the 22nd of November, and that essentially gives us a bit more breathing space in terms of the validity of our ratings, should we wish to, such that when the current government restrictions are finally lifted, there won't be a mad rush to get all our revalidation and renewals done by proficiency check and give people a bit of a breather and get back into flying without necessarily having to deal with a load of expired ratings first. So if we start with the with the EASA exemption here, so we've got ORS 1374, which is an exemption to the basic regulation. Article 71 of the basic regulation gives the national authorities the power to kind of exempt from regulation in exceptional circumstances. And this one is essentially based on a template that kind of EASA came up with. And essentially, if you have a variety of different ratings, technical knowledge exams are going to expire, and a number of other things, including medical, which we'll talk a bit more about later. This allows a kind of a one-time extension procedure based on essentially a technical briefing with an examiner, which will no doubt consist of questions and reviewing certain areas of technical knowledge and proficiency, and that will allow you to extend your rating currently until the 22nd of November such to give you a bit more time, such that when we do get back to flying, we won't have to. There won't be a mad rush on examiners. So starting with paragraph 2, which is probably kind of where the T's and C's really start. Essentially, this applies to ratings that expire on or after the 16th of March 2020 and before the 31st of October. So although the exemption goes currently until the 22nd of November, and that's kind of the limit to which a rating can currently be extended under this scheme, the existing validity period has to fall within those dates in order for this alleviation to be used. So that's the kind of the first thing to understand. In terms of what it actually covers, if you look at 2A there, you've got class ratings, type ratings, IR, etc., mountain ratings, also got medical certificates, instructor examiner certificates, etc. And it also covers the TK, etc. I mean, in this context, I propose we just focus on the sort of ratings that are likely to be relevant to GA pilots, and specifically the SEP rating and also the LAPL, because they kind of the means by which they can be revalidated perhaps makes this discussion very slightly more complex rather than those that are just ratings that are just a proficiency check. So if we just take the SEP rating as our example, essentially, if you fall within those dates, you might be wondering, well, okay, maybe I was intending to revalidate by experience originally, and maybe I didn't meet those requirements already, and now I can't go flying, and now otherwise, my rating is going to expire at some point in the future, and likely I might have to revalidate or renew even by proficiency check. So this, though, offers you an alternative, which is to say, well, provided I go and get this briefing with an examiner or an instructor, then I can get my SEP rating extended until the 22nd of November. And that might buy me a little bit more time to get my experience hours if I want to revalidate by experience. Come the next time you sort of revalidate for real, as it were. Or maybe I just want to be able to go flying a little bit before, even if I am ultimately going to have to revalidate or renew by proficiency check at some point in the future. This just kind of buys you a bit of time to, buys you a bit of flexibility to do that. So that's kind of the SEP rating. I mean, one thing to remember about this, of course, is that if you extend the rating until the 22nd of November, you are essentially altering the kind of the look back period for the purposes of revalidating by experience. That's just something to sort of be aware of. But in terms of the actual mechanism for how you actually do this, so you fall within the dates, SEP rating is definitely covered by this exemption. Paragraph 3 really is the actual kind of procedure that you have to sort of go through. So if we look, paragraph 3A, so holders of class ratings, type ratings, etc. Benefiting from 2A, B, or E of this exemption, so the SEP rating is covered under the ratings insofar as ratings are listed at 2A. So hold or have held on the 16th of March, yep, so we already know that. A valid relevant rating. So actually one thing to note here is that it is possible actually to essentially renew until the 22nd of November. Like, the rating doesn't necessarily have to be valid, because it just says hold or held on the 16th of March 2020.
Yeah.
And then if we go to A3A2, during the validity period of this exemption, have received a briefing from an instructor who holds relevant instructional privileges in order to refresh the required level of theoretical knowledge, etc., etc., to safely operate the applicable class or type, and to safely carry out the relevant manoeuvres and procedures. That briefing shall be based on the content of the appropriate examiner report form. So essentially it's saying use the sort of skill test schedule, which for the SEP rating is broadly just the PPL one, like you would get if you were going to revalidate your SEP rating by proficiency check.
Yeah. So
in terms of the detail of that, I know the examiners are all kind of getting together at the moment, and various ATOs and pilot organizations have kind of produced standardized briefings, videos, guides, etc. The CA have not delved too much themselves into specifying in too much detail exactly what that briefing should contain, other than to just reference the examiner report form. And I know, the examiners are well on top of this now in terms of how this should kind of, work in practice. I mean, as long as you're, I think, prepared with the level of technical knowledge and proficiency that you would, approach an actual proficiency check, I'm sure you'll be fine. And then finally, it says in the end of that paragraph there, the briefing may be carried out remotely. So I suspect in the vast majority of cases, the briefing will be carried out remotely. And I'll come on to in a bit how that's actually kind of evidenced once it's been done. I mean, I should say here, just in terms of the SEP rating, obviously it says in the paragraph here that the briefing can be from an instructor who holds relevant instructional privileges, i.e. relevant privileges for the rating. I suspect in reality for the SEP rating, this is either going to be done primarily by examiners or by instructors with the FCL 945 privilege, who under normal circumstances would be able to, sign off a revalidation by experience, provided that they also conducted the 1 hour's dual flying required as part of the normal SEP experience requirements. So in this context, either of those two can also sign off on this extension. So going on to paragraph B then of 3, talking a bit more about the actual kind of processes and procedure here. So upon successful completion of the briefing as per 3A2, the new expiry date of the relevant rating, and if applicable, the language proficiency endorsement, don't worry too much about language proficiency, it's probably not going to be relevant to most GA pilots, shall be recorded in the normal way appropriate to the license held. This should be an endorsement of the license of the pilot by one of the following: an instructor holding an appropriate instructor certificate in accordance with FCL 945. So that's the reference, the 945 instructors that I mentioned just now. So a 945 instructor can do that. An examiner in accordance with FCL 1030, that just means a qualified examiner in this context, or exceptionally by the CA. I'm not sure if there's any context in here where the CA would be doing this, but they probably just put that in there for, to cover some eventuality that they might not have thought of yet. And then for LAPL holders, the endorsement of the personal pilot logbook of the pilot by the instructor. So far in that paragraph B of 3, they're kind of talking about doing this in the sort of, conventional way. I suspect in reality, we're going to use these forms they've actually come up with, which are in the notes. So if we go to note 4 of the exemption and the sort of final page here, which is recording of extension of privileges. So essentially, as we said in the bulk of in the paragraph of the exemption before, it's basically talking as if the examiner fills out the certificate of revalidation page, kind of in the normal way. But obviously, in most of these scenarios, the examiner's not actually going to be present. So they've also come up with this kind of alternative procedure using these forms, which I'll talk a little bit about now. So in 4A of the notes, it basically covers how you would do this if you were writing the C of R in the normal way. So if you're totally adverse to technology and maybe want to put your certificate of revalidation in the post or something like that, then it basically says at the column in the C of R, date of a rating test and or date of IR test, as applicable obviously, the examiner would enter CARS 4 1374 in the bit where normally you'd have the valid from bit, and then enter the new expiry date as permitted by this exemption, i.e. 22nd November, along with the examiner's certificate number, etc., in the normal place that you would put the the end date of the rating's validity in the C of R page. But I suspect in reality, most people are not going to do that. In reality, most people are going to follow the what's outlined in note 4D, which is basically says where the license or logbook endorsement at 3B, C, or E is carried out remotely. So B3, 3B, C, or E is just a reference to ratings, FIs, and LAPLs respectively. So there's no need to refer back on that one. But where this logbook license or endorsement is carried out remotely, the instructor or examiner shall provide the pilot with a temporary certificate extending validity of license privileges, forms SRG 1100 and 1100A. So 1100 is the form relevant for all the ratings in this context, so the SEP rating, IR, etc. And most of the examiners seem to think that this is the way that most people do it, and it's also probably a better way because it leaves a little bit more of an audit trail in terms of regularizing the C of R page in the future when you come to revalidate or renew your license the next time. This form may be done electronically or by post, and the pilot shall carry a hard copy of the temporary certificate with their license. So done primarily electronically, and obviously, one party can sign it, send it, etc., and then carry the hard copy when you're walking around with with your license.
Okay, so let me just try and take the slightly dim pilot view, which would be me in this case. If my SEP expired between the 16th of March and the end of October, I don't need to panic. I need to get hold of an instructor or an examiner, and hopefully the instructor will know if he's an appropriately qualified instructor, as in this 945 privilege thing, and so will the examiner. The examiner will be anyway. Have a chat with them remotely, either on the phone or by video or whatever. Make sure they're happy with things, and if they're happy with things, they can email me this form that they can fill out, which I can print out and carry around in my logbook until 22nd of November. If I'm low tech, in which case I'd have struggled with the video or maybe even the phone chat for some people. Maybe that's a step too far. Then somehow there'll be an exchange of logbooks over suitable social distancing methods. But basically, most people are going to get something emailed to them, which they need to print out, and then come the 22nd of November, at that point, they need to sort things out. They need to have sorted things out properly, whether that be by experience or by a proficiency check of some kind. Is that?
Yeah, that's a very good summary. And as I say, like this exemption's been out just over a week now. The examiners seem to be getting their heads together on this subject. They're generally pretty switched on, and I suspect people who now approach them looking to get this done will find willingness to assist. I mean, the other thing I've noticed actually over the last week is that whenever the question of remuneration has come up in this subject, a lot of examiners seem to be saying, just make a donation to a charity of our choice or whatever it is. I don't get any sense that anyone's going to be making any money out of this. Yeah, I think the community is responding well in that regard.
Excellent. Now, as I understand it, which is kind of a slightly dodgy. Why does it keep doing this? Slightly dodgy thing. Understanding it like this. LAPLs. People who got LAPLs. What's the situation there?
Yeah. So LAPL, kind of needs its own little sort of discussion, because obviously the construct with the LAPL is slightly different in terms of it doesn't really have ratings as such. It just has a kind of a basic privilege, which is to fly GA aircraft up to 2,000 kilos with 4 people on, etc., etc. But in terms of the validity of it, it basically uses the kind of look back model rather than a sort of fixed start and end point of a rating validity as such. So if you're looking to go flying on a particular day and you're a LAPL holder, you essentially have to look back a certain period, normally 24 months, I think, for aeroplanes, and say, right, have I done within the last 24 months the requisite requirements? What this exemption basically does for LAPL holders, and if we just go back to paragraph 2J of the exemption, which is just a little bit there for the LAPLs. Yes, so the time period specified in the following is extended the last 32 months under FCL 140A, so that's LAPL aeroplanes, and it also mentions towing rating recency, and the last 20 months for FCL 140H, so that's for helicopters. So essentially the look back period within the time span of this exemption has been changed to 32 months. So if I'm, let's say I want to go flying, let's say the restrictions have been eased sometime in, I don't know, sometime in October or something like that, and I want to go flying. If I've complied with this exemption under the LAPL, my look back period is now 32 months rather than 24, which will obviously buy me a bit more time potentially to sort of top up my hours. Because of course, the thing with the LAPL that you've got to remember in the context of this exemption is that as soon as this exemption expires, your look back period just goes back to 24 months. So if there's some flight that took place between 24 and 32 months ago, that during the course of this exemption, you're able to count, as it were. The moment this exemption goes away, then you no longer can. So obviously, it buys you that time if you take advantage of it, as it were. And then you just got the 20 months for the helicopters, because under the normal circumstances, the helicopter pilot gets slightly less, of a look back period. Is more recent experience required.
Yeah, excellent. Okay.
And just in terms of the LAPL procedurally, in terms of complying with the exemption, if we just look briefly at paragraph 3E, holders of LAPL licenses benefiting from point 2J, so that's the requirement we've just been looking at, during the validity period of this exemption, have received a briefing from an instructor who holds relevant instructional privileges, etc., etc. So the requirement is essentially the same. The briefing should be based on the content of the appropriate examiner report form, etc., as appropriate to the endorsements on the license. So if you just have endorsements for fixed wing aeroplane, then that applies to you. On completion, the instructor shall endorse the personal logbook of the pilot, or the endorsement may be carried out remotely. So that's 4C, 4D. So if we just go, the reason I'm sort of emphasising this is that, of course, the LAPL doesn't have a C of R page in quite the same way. So in note 4C, they have just highlighted the fact that for LAPL holders, when endorsing a personal logbook, pilot logbook, the instructor examiner should enter the date and details of the briefing, just like in the other column or something like that of the logbook, together with their instructor or examiner certificate number. So again, that refers to the procedure if you're actually kind of doing this kind of physically. If you don't want to have to exchange logbooks or anything like that, then the procedure at 4D that we were talking about earlier in terms of the form can also be used. So just going back to 4D again, where the license or logbook endorsement at 3B, C, or E. So E is referring back to the LAPL instance. 3E is carried out remotely. The instructor or examiner shall provide the pilot with the temporary certificate form, SRG 1100, in the same way that they would with the SCP rating. It's just a very slightly different procedure, but if to reflect the lack of the C of R. But if you're using a totally remote solution and you're using the forms, etc., then the procedure is essentially the same.
Okay, so I mean, I'm kind of taking, again, going back to the slightly lazy version of things. I'm kind of hoping that if it was me, I'd be kind of hoping that my instructor, examiner, or whatever knew those bits, gave me the chat and said, "Oh, by the way, I email you this form, or I'm going to sign your logbook, print it out, and carry it with you, or something." I think for most of us, there's enough to get our heads around, and then hopefully the instructors and well, I'm sure that all instructors and all examiners are always completely up to date and fully understand every line of every regulation. So we can leave that. I don't know why you're laughing.
Well, all I can say in this context is that, yes, not obviously, like there's a process out there in the community at the moment to get everyone on a common understanding of this. I sense that process in motion and is doing very well. If any examiner is unsure of any of the requirements written here, when I initially spoke to the CA about this, for example, the view was very much that when they were developing this, they wanted to get the privilege out there. They wanted to roll everything into kind of one exemption just to kind of get the ball rolling. It does seem a bit sort of long and complicated, but actually when you come down to it, it's fairly straightforward and well written kind of procedure, I think. And that support, and in order for us to move towards a common understanding of how this is done in practice, is definitely there and developing further.
Okay, so we're up to 25 minutes at the moment, so I'm not sure how many people. Hopefully, we're keeping a whole load of people with us. But can we have a quick summary of the medical thing?
So yeah, so for people under this exemption, which is essentially all pilots other than those that operate as part of an organisation, the medical situation is really straightforward. This exemption, basically, as long as one does not experience any reduction in medical fitness that would normally affect the status of one's medical, this exemption just gives a blanket extension until the 22nd of November. So assuming you remain healthy and assuming you don't suffer from any of the the issues that would normally affect your medical status, you can just carry on flying as if you have a valid medical under this exemption, even if the certificate expired sometime in July, August, or whenever it was. And obviously the dates that we referred to earlier, the 16th of March and the 31st of October, also apply exactly the same in the medical context.
So for argument's sake, if you're someone who has let's say, a medical with a 2-year validity or 5-year validity, then when you go flying during that period, you effectively self-certify every day you go flying. You go, wow, I still feel fit.
Yes.
I still feel
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
And this just extends that to the 22nd. So if on the 1st of October, you happen to decide you want to go flying, and we can all go flying then, and you're feeling a bit poorly or you've got something wrong with you, then clearly you don't fly. And you get that sorted out in a normal way. So that nothing too complex there. And okay, just lastly, just to nip over the fence into the national license garden. There was some confusion when that came out originally. That probably might not have been the best piece of drafting in legislative history, and that's been.
Yes, I realised. I realised that clearly things were not quite as they should have been when a few notable forumites sort of confessed to being confused, which is never a good sign.
It's always good when the experts go,
"Yeah,
I get this."
But it's now been reissued, and essentially it now does mirror the EASA one broadly, certainly in terms of the dates within which the existing validity period has to, expiry date has to fall. So 16th of March, 31st of October. So that's the same. We're talking here about, the MPPL, AH&M. We're talking about the other kind of national licenses like the PPL balloons, the gyroplanes, or if there's still a few PPLMs lying about, that sort of thing. So that's kind of basic, all the kind of nationally regulated, non-EASA stuff. In terms of the way the ratings are treated, it's pretty much the same in terms of who can do it. So if you've got like a national SEP rating, for example, you're into the world of examiners or 945 privilege as well. Because actually, what the 945 privilege is one of these sort of slightly weird ones, which kind of cross-pollinates between the two. It's where a privilege, in the EASA system can be sort of deployed in the national one as well. But all that's broadly the same. A ditto with the medicals, because we don't, the UK doesn't do national medicals anymore anyway, other than obviously the pilot medical declaration system. The only real difference that I could detect here actually was just in the notes in terms of how the procedure is actually evidenced. So there doesn't seem in the explanatory notes to be any reference to the SRG 1100 form. They seem to be more interested in this context in just writing things in logbook. So if we look at explanatory note 4, for example.
Take me a while to get this one up. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. Okay.
See if I can manage to do this. Application window. Which one's this? 1378, isn't it?
Yeah.
There you go, 1378.
Yeah, so if we just go to the explanatory notes on the last page, because the body of the exemption is drafted slightly differently due to the kind of different legal framework, but the essential requirements are the same. But yeah, if we just look at note 4 of the explanatory note, so slightly different terminology here. So in paragraph A, so license holders recording the extension of the recency validity period. I'm not quite sure. I think the reference to recency is perhaps slightly spurious here, but anyway, should be subject to a briefing that can be conducted preferably in electronic, audio, visual link or telephone, or in person maintaining social distance requirements. You know, as we said before, 95% of this is going to be done remotely anyway. Covering theoretical knowledge and flight safety subjects. Same requirement there, really. So the difference here is, so if it goes on to say the confirmation of this briefing is to be recorded in the logbook in one of the following methods. The instructor examiner will confirm by electronic means. This is to be printed and affixed to the logbook. So I think that, you know, the examiners have come up with some kind of standard statement with their number and signature and send it to the pilot to sort of stick in their logbook or something like that. Or will confirm by letter to be affixed by the logbook, or make an entry in the logbook, again, if you want to put your logbook in the post or get it to them in some other manner. A copy of this exemption notice is to be carried as part of their license, okay? And then ditto, if you are, you know, operating with an expired medical, the same requirement as per the EASA one, you know, carry the exemption with you as well applies. So it's just no mention of the form there. I don't know if that's was an intentional omission, or whether it was intended that the forms only apply in the EASA context. I suspect it's the latter, but otherwise the exemption is now broadly the same in terms of the T's and C's between the national and the EASA.
So I guess really that's from the national point of view. It's get your briefing, get an email, put it in your license, go flying.
Yeah.
When we can go flying. Brilliant,
yeah.
fantastic. Maybe. Thank you very much for that, Ed. That's made it, put it into a slightly, not slightly, a significantly more understandable view. So effectively, phone up your instructor examiner, have a chat with them, get it sorted, get them to send you some stuff, and go flying. And then when we all get back, get your medicals booked or whatever else it is to get booked, your proficiency checks, if that's how you're doing. Excellent. Oh, last question then, Ed. When can we go flying again?
I don't know. Unfortunately, it's not up to me. not up to me. But hopefully, as and when the time comes, this exemption will just buy us a little bit more time to maybe go flying before having to revalidate or renew again, or if we still want to revalidate by experience in the SEP context, just buy us a little bit more time to gain those hours. I mean, one thing actually just occurs in that we probably mentioned with the SEP rating. Of course, if you are looking to revalidate by experience and have already met the normal experience requirements, then obviously you don't need to worry about this exemption. You just need to track down an examiner who's prepared to sign it off in the normal way. Yeah, no, so that's good. That's very true, actually. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, Ed. Pleasure.
If you found this useful, if you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. And please subscribe not only to the YouTube channel, but to the magazine as well. And that will be on www.flyer.co.uk/shop. And otherwise, it's the normal subscribe link and bell for YouTube. Thank you very much. Bye.